Okay, very good. So my name is Ken Cross, and I'm going to see a show of hands. We got people on machines still out there, but I spoke to you last year after I walked to the Camino to Santiago. And how many of you saw that presentation last year? Okay, so I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to try to avoid repeating this year. And how many are familiar with the Camino? Have you heard of the Camino? Okay, very good. So I'm going to hold the questions to the end because the amount of material I have in here, I think I'll answer 90% of your questions, but kind of jot them down as we go. Just leading off here, probably many of you have seen the film by Martin Sheen and Amelia Estevez called The Way. It was put out in 2010. That's on the right there. And then you can't see this at home with the laser pointer. But and then the book that's most common on the left-hand side you see there is a book by a fellow named John Brierley, who's written these guidebooks for many of the routes of the Camino. He just passed last year, but his daughter's taken that over. So the fellow in the center you see here, we got tagged the boys. On the left is a fellow named Frank Cabrera, and I walked his solo the Camino last year, the Camino Frances, over 800 kilometers, over almost 500 miles. And I met Frank in January 2023 on one of the local Sacramento Pilgrims walks on a Sunday. And he came over, and I think it was like veteran radar, right, that picked up. And we started, he became my unofficial mentor for the Camino. And while we're both U.S. Army veterans, he was in Vietnam, I was a peacetime guy. And this year was his seventh Camino when we walked my second. He's a Sac State graduate, got a bachelor's of arts, and master's in 75, and master's in 77 in speech pathology. And he's a retired teacher. He taught 2 years in Japan and 37 years in the Elk Grove School District. So about half that time in the classroom, half that time in administration. So he's 74 years old. He'll be 75 in November. I'm 72. I'll be 73 in December. So the one thing that Frank warned me on this trip, or Francisco warned me, was don't expect as many people on this route as you saw in the Frances. And he was right. And he knows I like to talk to people. He's more introverted. He likes to take pictures of nature. I like to talk to people and take their pictures. Was a good match. So, all right. Let's see. It's not going to cooperate with me now, so I'll go over here and all right. Yeah, maybe I'll try the mouse then. All right. All right. Is that not? Okay, there we go. All right. Turn them on, turn them back off with computers always, right? So the significance of this slide was last year. So some of you out there are maybe Renaissance Society members, but we have a program that's been going on for over 30, probably closer to 40 years with the gerontology department, and it's Gerontology 121 program called Optimal Aging. This will be my 18th semester doing this. I started at the very beginning. And basically what you do is you meet with a student in the Gero 121 class, and you act as a mentor to them. And you have 4 or 5 meetings, and he asks you open-ended questions about the arc of your life. I see it's kind of like cheap therapy. It's you got a student and they ask you these questions, and each time my answers are probably different because it's like peeling back an onion, knowing more about yourself. So one of the things that we have is a kickoff event, and we had a celebration event at the end, a kind of a potluck. And the students in recent years have been not required, encouraged to create a 6-word biography. And it's a way of describing life using 2 rules. One, that you must use 6 words exactly. And second, they must be words that the student uses that is believed to be true and are exclusively their own. So they're given the thing to describe their mentee in 6 words. So on May 15th of last year, the night before I went on my Camino, my student, Elizabeth Cruz Fabian, put this slide together, and the significance of the wording is be whoever you want to be was something my mom used to tell me when I was a child. And then I noticed the picture behind this, and she was a very quiet young lady, and she picked up on the fact that I was going on Camino, and I go, oh, that's the Camino, right? So I shared that with everybody in the class, and they broke out in applause. All these students did. They were in the class. And then afterwards, a lady came up and Renaissance member and shared that she'd actually walked Caminos twice. So for me, the next day I took off for my first Camino. So it was kind of a poignant time to be able to have something like that as a kickoff. So here are the routes. Many times people hear about the Camino that don't realize there are many routes to the Camino. And the one I walked last year was from here at St. Jean Pied de Port to Santiago de Compostela, from east to west. This year I was traveling from Porto in Portugal, north to Santiago de Compostela, and then over to Finisterre on the Atlantic Ocean. But you'll see the tradition of this is that people would start wherever they lived. So it could be in France, it could be England, they could be in Germany, Italy, and they'd walk, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 kilometers before they ever got to the main routes of the Camino. Then once they got there, they walked the ocean, got their shell, like I'm holding up here, which is symbolic of the Camino, and then they walk home again. Fortunately, I got to ride in a plane, so I didn't have to walk all the way home. But the significance of the Camino is, so the story goes, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ was St. James, and St. James was one of the missionaries that went out to spread the word, and he had done that in Portugal and towards northern Spain. And when he was in the Middle East, he was one of the Herods, dismembered him, and his followers brought his head back from the Middle East, back along the coast and up the ocean, supposedly in a rock boat. And ultimately, his portion of his body was buried in Santiago de Compostela, and that's where they built a huge cathedral on top of it. So it's a spiritual pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage that goes, it's one of the big three. It's number one is Jerusalem, number two is Rome, number three is the Camino de Santiago. So that's kind of the significance of this walk. And this goes back over 1,200 years that people have been walking these routes. So between the last 2 years, I've met people from 51 countries, and I realized researching there are 195 countries in the world. So I've met people from about over a quarter of the countries in the world. So and some I'm still looking for, right? But a lot I'm still looking for, but it's amazing. And I met people from 6 of the 7 continents. The one that's still escaping me is Antarctica. I'm looking for the elusive parka wearing Antarctica, and you see there in the red screen. So I think my chances are pretty slim of that, but I'm continuing to look. So you see pilgrims from all around the world. So you see here people from Denmark, Scotland, Australia, Argentina, South Africa, Brazil, Poland, Czech Republic, Finland, Taiwan. And the one that I thought was significant this year, Francisco met her. We introduced ourselves, was Carla from Namibia. It's in Southern Africa. I had to look it up, Google it to find out where it was. So she says, you're not going to find anybody else from my country here. So as we go along, I also have met people from 40 of the 50 US states. So I'm always asking people what's your name, where you're from, and why you walk the Camino. So I'm still got about 10 states I'm looking for also. So here's some pilgrims from the United States. You see them from all over. It's kind of interesting. I ran in this year and a couple of people from Sacramento. Ashley, who's in the lower left-hand corner here, was a neural speech therapist, is now in Seattle. And this gal up here, Chris, who from Sacramento and Davis, she went to nursing school down in Texas. And I was going like, what's the name of that school? We looked it up online, and it's the one that President Nelson was at before he came out here at the Sacramento State for 8 years. But you'll see there we have people from gal up here, New Paltz, New York, who's an organic farmer for 35 years. People just from all over, North Carolina, Massachusetts, people in Minnesota, another woman and her friend from Roseville, California. So if you look at the demographics of this, it's interesting. About 60% of the people who walk Camino are female, 40% male, and all ages, you'll see, all ages. And since I started walking, preparing the Camino, these are just a few of the people that I've met at Sacramento who've walked the Camino. About half the people up there on the screen are folks who are Renaissance Society members. They've walked all kinds of distances from 100 kilometers to, over 800 kilometers. And they've had all kinds of occupations that they've had in their lifetimes, but all of them were really, their lives were changed one way or the other by their time in the Camino. Occupations, you can get a feel for all the different occupations there. Some of the noteworthy ones was I found a guy last year who had been worked for the CIA for 30 years. I said, I don't need to know anymore. You don't, if you tell me, I don't want you to have to kill me or anything. And then I met another fellow who was a restorer of churches, and he'd done that for 20 years, restored about 50 churches in Europe. I think the longest one he said took him 13 years and cost about 23 million euros. So that was a really unique profession. I've never met anybody like that before.
What's the forest?
A different duck. It's this woman right here in the best. Her name was Silky. She was Southern Germany. The best time, she was probably like a Californian hippy dippy, flower child kind of gal is what I would describe her. Right, and so she was different. She was a nice lady, but very different, right? So, and then here's Shirley up here in the upper left-hand corner. She was in South Africa. She had a travel park owner. Here's a med school graduate in the U.S. This fellow down here, Johann, was from Cologne, Germany, and he was walking his 15th Camino. And he had been a Catholic theologian, and then later in life, he became a marriage family therapist, and he combined the two. And his wife had passed some years before, and after he retired, she always wanted to be a priest. That was not going to happen in the Catholic Church. I think he had a grudge, and so he left the Catholic Church and went to another one after he retired. He says, I knew too much. Okay, whatever, right? This couple here you see with the guy in the red is a police officer, and her husband was a car salesman. So all kinds of professions that you see people.
But the same job throughout the world. That's what.
Yeah, just and some really unique ones that I had. Tell me what that is, or what you do there, right? Once again, pilgrims from around the world. You see folks here, from Paris and the tech industry to Nuremberg, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Australia. This couple down here was interesting. JWOP was his name, and Marlies, she was a nurse, and he was in the flower boat business. He's from the Netherlands originally. And so the deal was they had gone on a vacation. He got to go on a motorcycle, them on a motorcycle for 2 weeks in Italy. And the return was he had to go on a walk for 4 days on the Camino. That's what his wife wanted to do. So he thought it was a good deal that he'd worked out there. So, but people just, this gal here, Cynthia, you see here on the left-hand side, second on the bottom and second photo in. I was talking to her. She was from California originally. She had moved to Baja and in Mexico and was working down there. And I said, so what did you do? She said, I was a stunt woman. And I said, okay. I said, how did you get in that? She said, I stole my parents' car when I was 13 years old. I think this is not the first time she's been asked that question, right? But I said, well, what's a film that I would know? She says, I was in The Matrix Reloaded. She said, we filmed for 3 months for a 20-minute chase scene in that film. So you never know who you're going to run into right here on the Camino. So Linda asked me earlier, I said, this is walking the Camino Triple Crown. What does that mean? That's our moniker we gave this. We walked, as you see here on the left, we walked up the coast of Spain from Porto north, about 200 and almost 85 kilometers. And then next we jogged over here and took a 3-day route for almost 80 kilometers there called the Spiritual Variant, which kind of follows the route that supposedly St. James' body went up the river in a stone boat. I don't have to explain the stone boat, but supposedly this is a good story, right? And then when we got to Santiago, we went 90 kilometers west to the end of the earth, to Finisterre, which is where the traditional route that the pilgrims would travel. So it's about, it's right up in here. It's right in the last little spaceship, the last 3 dots up here on the left-hand side. So it's a cutout of that section. Yeah. Had to work to find that one, but it's I'll show you, it's a really, really beautiful route. So I asked Mr. Google, how far is 273 miles in California? And Mr. Google tells me that it's the distance from Sacramento, California to Ashland, Oregon. So last year I traveled from Sacramento almost the Mexican border, 480 miles, almost 800 kilometers, to Ensenada, California. This year I walked north. We walked north to Oregon. So walking the Camino, this is some pictures of me before and after. You can see me here last year. This is when I started the Camino. I had back problems. You'll notice I was carrying a child I delivered while I was there. I was a little overweight. But this year we went 455 kilometers, 273 miles. We covered that in 21 days from the 23rd of May to June the 12th. Averaged about 15 to 20 kilometers a day, which is about 13 and a half miles, with an estimated over 620,000 steps. So I think I would probably, Linda, I would get a good green check mark on my, I did not carry a pack this year. That was one of the agreements that Francisco and I had was, and I'll tell you more about that later, but we transported our packs, carried day packs, and we tried to keep our distance under 20 kilometers. So kind of, this was the stop and smell the roses tour, right? Rather than trying to see how fast you could go. Last year I lost between the training and the trip about 35 to 40 pounds. I gained some back this year. This year I lost about 8 pounds on the trip. And the fellow you see on the right there is my Dr. Wang is my primary care physician at Kaiser. I just had my physical with him. I got a big green thumbs up from him because all my stats were good, all my lab work. So one of the things we did before we went this year is Francisco and I went out with a friend of ours one time, Rick Mercer, and we walked 3 of these trails you see up here. So we went down the Secret Ravine Trail in Roseville, and then in February went to Laguna Valley Lake down in Vacaville in March, and in April we did the Phantom Falls Trail up in Orville. And reflecting back on this, I realized this was a veteran's test. Okay. Francisco is in much better shape than I am. So he was seeing if I had the strength, the stamina that I could keep up, I could do the elevation. So I guess I passed the test. So anyway, we had a good time doing that. So this is my Camino support teams, that kind of people that help me. One you see in the middle here is a local organization called the Sacramento Pilgrims. It's a nonprofit, all volunteer led, that has monthly presentations, events, a couple potlucks a year, do walks the last Sunday of the month along the American River Trail. We just did one last Sunday. So they help mentor me along the way. The fellow up here in the upper left is one of my good friends, Walter Wilson, who's been my volunteer once again this year to be my Uber driver to San Francisco airport and drop me off and to pick me up. Down here on the lower left is Ali Marin, who is Frank's girlfriend in Barcelona. And she made me sandwiches on my way back, so I didn't have to go out at 10 o'clock at night and find food. And this is her son, Victor, who actually drove me to my hostel the night before I came back. This is my wife and my niece up here, and I took them out to dinner. When I came back, they put up with all my WhatsApp, with all my photos. And then this is just an interesting young guy I met on the flight back, about 20 years old, a guy named Olinga, who was in his first year of college, and he was a Baha'i faith. And we were talking about that. I knew who the Baha'is were, and his family went back like 6 generations on his mom's side from Iran and 8 generations in his father's side from Norway. So we had a very, very interesting conversation. And the time's just going to fly by. So we started out in Porto, Portugal, and why I'm showing these pictures is to overcome jet lag. We spent a couple of days there, and you'll see up here, there's the marker outside the cathedral where we started. It was saying there it was 248 kilometers to Santiago. Don't ever try to tally up the kilometers because they never kind of work. But anyway, here's the old town Porto. They have river cruises. Here are the old Rabio boats that were traditional Portuguese cargo boats that haul the wine up and down the river. And then on the right here side, you see the Dom Luis I bridge, which is a double-deck metal arch bridge that spans the river 172 kilometers, and it's the longest of its type in the world. And then down here in the lower right-hand corner is supposedly the most beautiful McDonald's in the world. What do I know? You know, I don't eat at McDonald's, so I don't know, but it looked pretty nice. Okay. That's in Porto. Yes. And then up here is the Porto City Hall. This is the fantastic world of Portuguese sardines. So I brought some. I think Francisco and I have to eat these sometimes. These are actually clams, but it was a really beautiful place, and they're very proud of their canned seafood. So, and then there's wine tasting you can do there. This is actually in front of it's hard to see here, but we're sitting in the O's on Porto here in front of the City Hall. And then these pictures here are in the San Bento train station, and they have these beautiful blue tiles on the walls, which Portugal is known for. And there's over 20,000 of those tiles, and it took the artist Jorge Colaco 11 years to complete the building, the laying of those tiles in that facility. So here you see a cable car. Here you see the river going down to the ocean. So it was really beautiful and allowed us to kind of get over our jet lag before we started our hike. One of the things you'll see in Porto is the Livraria Lilo bookstore. And this is a beautiful, beautiful. You see the front of it here on the left-hand side, and then inside you see this carved interior wood. Oftentimes people think that this was the genesis of what you see in Harry Potter. And J.K. Rowling, the writer of those books, she lived in Porto. She never went to the library, but somebody kind of probably got their ideas for actually putting this in the book. So it's a beautiful thing. You can take a tour of it. So right there in Porto itself. So there's some pictures of the coast of Portugal. Just beautiful, beautiful countryside you see there. Lighthouses, beaches, woods, sands, these boardwalks, wooden boardwalks that are just beautiful. And some more coastal pictures. It's a really, really picturesque place. And one of the things that's intriguing, you see things and you wonder, what is that all about? And so we went under and around this bridge heading into Vigo, and you see in the lower right-hand corner, these rafts down there, and we wonder, what the heck are those rafts? And we did some asking questions. I did some Googling, and turned out there's this whole industry there from mussel farming. And so what they do off the bottom of those rafts, you'll see these lines, they seed these nettings and ropes with mussels, and that's how they farm them. So they have vertical farming underwater with those mussels. And so this center picture shows the whole process from seeding, the cultivating, growing, to cultivating, the harvesting, and the final product. And so lots of good seafood in Portugal. The Portuguese countryside, just absolutely gorgeous, streams and rivers and woods and bridges and beautiful little towns. Just a gorgeous place to walk through. And of course, the other thing you'll see a lot of is nature, animals, and art. When we came in from Portugal to Spain, we landed, they had this kind of optical illusion on the trees. So if you stood just right, you could see these images on the trees. You saw all kinds of beautiful trees. And this is here, the big tall tree is a Spanish pine. These cats, cat Sissy here, Mia, this is one of the owners, her pets in her albergue in the little hostel we stayed in. And the cat would meet you and greet you and walk you to the albergue or walk you to the monastery in town. It was really they were a real trip. And then these beautiful murals you see here on the right-hand side, they were actually painted under a bridge that we came through. So all kinds of nature and art. One of the most beautiful places, Francisco told me about this, and he really didn't do it justice. There was about an 8-kilometer, about a 5-mile route from Armatira to Ponta Arenas, which was through following this river and these brooks, babbling brooks, and there was these old mills along there. It was like a fairy tale land, and just beautiful, gorgeous, and it was one of the most memorable portions of the trip. And it was called the Route of Stone and Water, or the Ruta de la Pedra de Agua. Francisco tried to teach me Spanish while I was there. It was a hopeless task, but anyway, that was a very beautiful route to travel. Okay, so Different ways of walking the Camino. You see here on the left, last year I had a husband and wife that were walking together. You have people on bicycles. You had the whole families walking. These kids were walking last year from a Catholic parochial school, ninth graders from Madrid. And so there were like 50 some of them walking, and they come and you hear them coming, you see them zoom past, and then they're out of sight, with all that energy. And then you see people on horseback that ride the Camino. So lots of different ways. All kinds of walking surfaces you see there, cobblestones, boardwalks, asphalt, water. We actually, went across from Portugal to Spain, about a 10-minute boat ride. You see there's dirt pathways, rock, gravel, every kind of surface that you can think of to walk on. And then you have all your different markers that you'll see along the way. The most typical one you see on the right-hand side here is that monument, they call it, where it'll have the arrow, the yellow arrow pointing the direction to go. And under it is a little plate with how many kilometers you have to go. So it's you'll see those. And then also you'll see these brass markers, which I actually have over here, some props you can look at. And those are the ones that they actually inset in the streets, in the major cities, every 10 meters, so they don't paint on the side of buildings. And I've got the one on, well, both of these. I actually got this one for my niece on the right here, and then the one here on the left I got for myself. So lots of different sites along the way, some, just beautiful. I have this one down here with this picture. It was a monument to the mule, to Birol. And so the question here is, who's the ass in this photo? This is a test question. Okay, so down in the lower right-hand corner, this is actually this stairway, and it doesn't really give you, but it was a stairway up with stages of the cross all along the way where you could stop, and they had little pictures of monuments. And so just all kinds of things like these you see. So here's some of the traditions and customs that are kind of interesting. So this pond here, I took a picture of it as a hook on somebody's door. As you went by their house, people would come and deliver fresh bread and hang it on that hook in the morning, right? This yellow thing here, that's their form of a mailbox for Carrero in Spain, of the Spanish mailbox. This thing here is called a Herrero, and in Galicia, in Spain, or actually in Portugal too, that's an old storage unit for grain. So they put their grain in there off the ground, so rats and mice and critters can't get in there and eat. And then this here is the Wagner, this big monument. You see me, I'm right under there, checking the Wagner out, and it's a werewolf that terrorizes pilgrims, supposedly. So here you see a couple of sets of boots out there. This artwork. The pilgrims are gone. The Wagner got the pilgrims there, right? So oh God, it's probably 10, 12, 15. I mean, you see me under there and I'm crouched down, but it's probably over 12 feet tall, 12, 15 feet tall. Yeah, big cast. Then some of these things, you're like, what the heck are these things? Well, it's somebody along the trail that actually decorated their house in these blue historical tiles, decorated a wall with flowers. This in here is in the middle on the top there is a wash station. And you find these in Portugal, especially we found them in Portugal. And what they do is combine three things. In the first stage, you could draw water. In the middle stage here, you could wash your clothes. And then as the water went out, it's what you could irrigate with, right? So you would find these either like meeting places traditionally that they kept there. They don't use them now, but where women or men would stop to get their water, to do their wash, and then do their irrigation. Then one of the places I stayed at, Horatio's, his albergue, he had this pink flamingo out in this wading pool. So I went out there and put my feet in. And some places we had maybe 3 or 4 had these foot baths, really, really cold water. So at the end of the day, when you're doing all this walking, right, you could put your feet in there and all the swelling would go down. So one of the questions that Francisco asked me last year, he said, what did you eat on the Camino? I told him I lost 35, 40 pounds. And I said, well, I ate a lot of times pilgrim meals, which are like a fixed menu for 12 or 15 euros. You get a first, second, third course. First course, like salad or pasta. Second is some kind of meat with potatoes. So it's like chicken or fish or, pork. And then the last is, bread, dessert, water, wine, or beer, or something like that. And so, it was pretty basic. Well, this is a picture I came across online of all the different kind of tapas they had. And that's what Francisco kept telling me. He said, we're going to get you to eat some tapas, right? You're going to try a little this. So our goal was to try every tapa we could find. And we did that. You'll see here, we had all kinds of food, from salads on the right-hand side here to calamari, to scallops, to pork shank, lentil soup, this kind of mixture of all kinds of things there. Pizza, bogadillo, which is a big sandwich, egg sandwich. See breakfast in the morning, these meat platters and cheese platters. This is actually a bakery. This woman here in the upper left-hand corner in the picture on the wall was Clarice, who had over 100 years ago had started this bakery, and she had created this. It was a Clarissa, and it was a pumpkin-filled pastry, and it got fourth place in the national pastry competition in Portugal. So we tried all kinds of food, and we actually tried more kinds of food. So here you'll see we were at a place, all they did is refectio, the refuge. You see there on the left-hand side where they cut the cheese and the meats and stuff. All they did is deal in tapas. And then we dined here one night, Francisco, Jackie, and I having more tapas. And then you see here some sardines served in vinegar and oil, croquetas, the choco, which is cheese, ground fish, and squiddy. They were black inside, right? We had mussels, we had huevos con patas. This is basically egg, potato and eggs. Pimentos de padron, which is roasted peppers, grilled squid, and my favorite dessert, rice pudding. That was just delicious.
Did you miss produce at all? Does it sound like
We had some salad. Yeah, well, here's a token salad over here. Is a ensalada con bonita and anchovies. So it had fresh bonita and anchovies. You see here so this place we found, this Casa Barraquero, was we got a referral from somebody in the street. So Francisco's talking to this lady in Spanish. She just wanted to get away, so she finally told us a local place. We were the only pilgrims in there, right? And so here's the Papa's menu, and we had more roasted peppers, and we had flan with cream. Oh, it was just delicious. And one of those hams up there, I bet you they go for $800 to $1,000. I mean, it's really premium ham. So yes, we did eat some salad. So why did they walk Camino? Every reason you can think of under the sun. People walk because religious reasons, not as much you might think. I've heard people estimate that maybe 10% of the people really go for religious reasons, but some people are in transitions in their life. Some are walking in memory of someone who's passed. Some are trying to recalibrating their life. Some are survivors of severe health issues. They're going through changes. Some are grieving. Just all the kind of reasons you can think of. And I would continue to be amazed by the stories. Now, there's another group of people you'll find, a very small percentage, but what I call, these are the narcissistic posers. And so you see there, we were always taking pictures of selfies, right, of us walking with different pole positions. And so I put them all up there, and we got a kick out of it anyways. I don't know if anybody else did. So one of the things I shared this last year is really unique about the Camino. It's someplace between the confessional and an AA meeting. And then I mean that people will talk about anything and everything in their life story. And so I typically would ask people, what's your name, where you're from, why you walk Camino, and then I would try to get them to talk about themselves. And most everybody, unless they were just in pain, I'd shut it down and not bother. But that only happened a few times. But you can see the roads were long, and so there's plenty of time to talk. And so it was a great way to be able to listen. And you only got people's first names. And I think part of that is that you meet so many people that it's kind of like they're going to remember their last name or not. It's not like they're hiding it, but they just tell you the first name. And I had one friend who would put a moniker with everybody, so it's how she remembered them. She call me? She called me She called me sideways. Yeah, sideways Ken is what she called me because I was so twisted in my back. I looked like I was crabbing down. Yeah, so I had lots of names. Gandalf. That was another one. The kids called me, right? Yeah. So people say, well, where do you stay? You can stay any place you want to. You can walk your own Camino. So you can stay in an albergue, which is like a bunkhouse, kind of like being in service again, to uh, a row, to a bed and breakfast, to a hotel. There's all kinds of different stages depending on what kind of privacy you want, what kind of amenities you want, what kind of how much you're willing to pay. So these are some of the places we stayed at that were memorable. What's interesting over here on the right-hand side is kind of like the top of the food chain, and this is what we call a parador. And this is the oldest hotel in Spain, supposedly. And so what the Spanish government did, and I think Portuguese, is they bought up a lot of these historic sites in order to maintain them and turn them into hotels. And so this is one in Santiago de Compostela. They range in different prices. That one's over 400 euros a night to stay in. So we didn't stay there. Francisco asked me, do you want to stay there? I said, I got better use of my money than paying that much for a bed. But what they did have that we took advantage of, they had a breakfast every morning, and we went in there and we ate, and it was a smorgasbord kind of thing with everything under the sun, just delicious. And I thought it was going to be like 24 euros a person. It ended up being $15 per head, right? And it was a real deal. And they had a pilgrim's discount too. So anyway, that's what they looked like, the albergues. And then what was always great is you had some great managers along the way. So this guy up in the upper left-hand corner, Fernando, he lived in Argentina for 30 years, in Portugal for 30 years. He ran this really nice guy. We really liked him. This is Saya. She just run her Camino for about 3 years, and you can see if you own one of these things, you work. This is not an easy job. This guy here, Guzman and Sia in Spain, he'd actually run this thing for about 13 years, I think, and he'd walked Camino twice. He walked it with his mom when he was 15 years old from the Frances, the whole 800 kilometers. And then he walked it when he was 31, and he was getting ready again to walk next year. And he had an even longer route to go. And then Horatio, I'll tell you more about, but he was a retired Portuguese army officer. And Tanya, who's an American, had been running her albergue for about 6 years. Beautiful place. And then Beatrice, she had a hotel in Santiago. We kind of treated ourselves staying there, and she really kind of bent over backwards to help us. We had some challenges at the end, and she ended up washing her clothes one night, and the next morning had her staff clean her clothes and help us get her bags and things. So she was a real sweetheart. So here's they always talk about Camino angels. These are people that kind of go out of their way to help you along the way. And we were walking one day and along the coast of Portugal and ran into these two guys, Albino and Alberto. And this guy was a chef, this guy was a telecom specialist. They bought us a pastry and gave it to us, just as a meat-filled pastry. This gal here was a bakery worker. She stamped our credentials. So one of the things you do is you walk the Camino, you carry this, what they call a credential, and each day you get it stamped at least once a day with these unique stamps. I have a wax one here, the old size wax one. And then the last 100 kilometers, you get them twice a day. So when you come into Santiago, this is your proof that you walked before in order to get your certificate, your Compostela. So you'd ask people like her to give you a hand, and typically you'd go in and buy a little something, get a pastry or coffee or something like that. The guy on the right here was a guy who was making these seashell art in his garage. And so we stuck our head in. He offered to have us come in and have a drink with him. And Francisco said, well, I've had health problems, I can't, and he doesn't drink, and so we thanked him for it. Very nice of him. At the very end, we'd booked all of our transporting of our baggage ahead of time, our packs, and we had a slip up, and our bags, we realized, were still sitting in Finisterre, 90 kilometers away. And so we were leaving the next day, and our bags were back there. So this service, we paid them some money, and they brought our bags and actually got them there in about 2.5 hours and delivered them to our hotel. We paid a little money, but we had hundreds of dollars of equipment in. And then this is a guy we met on the far right-hand side here. When we landed in our boat in Spain, he was walking, doing his morning walk. So he was, he and Francisco were speaking fluent Spanish, and he was telling us the lay of the land for that part of Spain, telling us all about it. So one of the things we do is we always kind of run into military veterans along the way, and it's kind of like a magnet. And I told you, the guy on the left here was Horatio, who had an albergue in Correggio, Portugal. His father is actually his father's house. He retired when he was 37 years in service. He was 57 years old. He turned this house into an albergue. His last assignment, he was in Colombia, and he was a negotiator for the UN working with FARC, with the terrorists down there. And I asked his wife, so how did you feel about that? She said, oh, he had an office job. I'm going, oh, yeah. There's no office jobs, these kind of things. Everybody's got a target, right? But I didn't bring them up. But anyway, he was a really nice guy. And he actually, one night when we stayed with him, we were tired. He drove us down to a restaurant rather than have us walk down there. So he offered to pick us up. We walked back. This couple we met at lunch one day in one of the towns we stopped at, and they were retired Army, U.S. Army. Here on the left, Sean was husband and wife. Sean was an Army JAG officer, Judge Advocate General officer, and both of them done over 20 years. His wife was a legal assistant. So this was their second Camino. This couple down here was from Spain. They were both retired military, had been in the military for over 20 years. And then here's Francisco and I. So one of the things you find is there's one of the categories you find youth that are kind of discovering their path in life. And so you hear all these young people out walking, trying to figure out what they wanted to do. This young gal here on the right-hand side, next to the bicyclist, Molly, we ran into her in Portugal towards the end. And she had just graduated medical school in Maryland, and she was going on the residency program. But just every kind of profession. There's Michelle down here in the lower right-hand corner. She worked in an ice cream shop in Denmark, right? So all various ages, trying to figure out what they wanted to do. Had a lot of special occasions. We ran into people and things that happened. The couple in the upper left-hand corner were Ron and Chris. Ron was 77 and Chris was 75. Her birthday was June the 5th. And why I remember that is when she said that, I realized that was my 50th anniversary of graduating from West Point. So it stuck in my mind. But they were from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They had walked, this is their second time walking Camino. They walked in 2019, on their 50th anniversary. And now they're walking, and that was in the Frances, the French way in Spain. And now they were walking in their 55th anniversary. So they'd run a portrait business for decades. And so they knew people all over Eau Claire, Wisconsin. One of the things you see is this boat down here, and this was the one that took the route along, like St. James Head did, along the route. It's about, rather than walking 28 kilometers, you could ride in the boat for about an hour and a half. And this was the captain, whose name just happened to be Santiago, of all things, right? So you would find traditional, and here was a guy playing the bagpipe. And that's one of the things. You have Celtic roots in Spain and Portugal and so you see people playing bagpipes. And then once again this year, I saw this last year, there's a holiday in May, or actually June. Yeah, June. I think it's the first Sunday in June, is the Feast of Corpus Christi. So you always have these parades and the churches and people marching. And then they do these elaborate decorations on the ground, and their flower petals and those kind of things, right? And then when it's over, they sweep them all up, they go away. But they're really beautiful. And it's throughout Spain, you see this, Spain and Portugal. They walk around it until afterward, and then they sweep it up. So I can only imagine how long it takes to do something like that. So you get some people to walk a long, long way. And this couple on the left, you see here, Tom with the United Kingdom, he's a teacher. His friend Yuza was from Japan. She's unemployed right now. They are on their 50th day of walking. They'd started in Bordeaux, France, and they were going to Santiago and then on to Finisterre. And they'd already walked over 800 miles. just like the guy in the middle, John from Belgium. He'd gone from Seville to Santiago, and he was going to Finisterre and then on to Porto. He had traveled almost 800 miles on his bike. And then this couple up here, Peter and Nanette from the Netherlands, they just retired. He was a machine press operator. She was a mental health nurse. They'd come from Holland to Santiago to Finisterre by bicycle, and then they were going to turn around and ride back. And they would travel over 3,000 kilometers, over 1,800 miles. So people logged some miles there. Now, here's a story I get a kick out of. So bear with me on this. We're walking one morning, and we come in, we run into this family, and it's mom and dad and 5 kids. And we start having conversation. Dad didn't say much, and the mother uh, uh, shared more with us. And she turns out that they were missionaries from Chad in Africa. And they've been running a hospital there for 14 years, a 100-bed hospital, part of by the Seventh-day Adventists, 25 miles from the closest paved road. He was an ER doctor. She was an OBGYN. And I said, well, how did he become this? And so apparently he graduated college. He went for 6 months to South Korea, 6 months in Africa. He's riding on a train. It comes to him. He's supposed to be a missionary. So he goes to the Seventh-day Adventist University Hospital down in Loma Linda, gets his medical degree, goes on to residency, meets his wife. And so when they go on this missionary trip to Chad in Africa, which is a tough place, I mean, she had one child, a baby, and she had another one, she was pregnant. And so they've had all the kids. I think she came back to States and had them. But how I found all this out was they were so intriguing. I went online and said, well, maybe I can Google and find something. There was all kinds of stuff about these people on the internet, right? And it turned out I listened to a podcast by an ER doc out of Kentucky who runs this national podcast for ER docs, where he finally got to interview the husband, Olin. And he was describing the conditions in Chad, and he says, I don't work with women 15 to 45 in childbearing years. My wife takes that. I'm the OBGYN. And of the first 6 children she delivered, 5 died. That's the kind of conditions you have. He says, I don't have the staff. I have no ICU. He says, I can't vent people, whatever. He says, I used to do that, but it ended up, I don't have the staffing for the family. We end up venting the people at night. And then their family member would die and they feel guilty. So he says, there are things we just don't do here. And he said, I spent 3 years studying on tropical medicine when I got here. He says, I studied harder here than I did in residency training. And so anyway, that was all very intriguing, right? And then I come across this article that says in 2020, the husband, wife, and their 4 kids at that time walked the Appalachian Trail over 2,000 miles. Then in 2021, the wife Danae had the second child. The one that's in the dad's pack. You see that green thing that's on his pack up there? That's a kid in there, the little one, right? So in 2021, they asked the kids, where do you want to walk? And they said, well, let's do that Continental Divide Trail. That's the tougher one, right? So they walked over 3,000 miles up the Continental Divide. And then last year, November, they finished the Pacific Coast Trail, the PCT. And now, so when they did the Continental Trail, there were the 4 walking kids, and he was carrying a baby. And then last year, it was, as you see now, they finished up the Continental Divide over 2,000 miles. So they've covered almost 8,000 miles, over almost 13,000 kilometers. And I sent this to a guy I met last year, this article on their hikes, to a guy down in the Bay Area who I'd met in Barcelona. And he's a pilgrim. He's walked it, and he's also what they call a triple crowner. About 30 years ago, he hiked all those 3 major trails. He says, oh, yeah. He said, I've been talking to Nate the last couple of years, and I'm hoping they will come to our annual gathering so they can get their award as triple crowns, right? And so somebody asked me lately, I said, well, how do kids walk this? Yeah, how do those kids do that? I said, they grew up in Chad. I said, there's no internet, there's no Game Boys. go out and play and stay away from the animals, right? So I mean, the kids have grown up in a tough lifestyle, but that's an example of a story. I met those people for 5 minutes, and I was so intrigued that it's like a story just bubbled out of it. This time I think they started in Porto and they were going to Santiago. So this is probably an easy hike for them compared to what they've been on because you have places. She said that they would go into a hostel or a place and get a room for 8. They needed 7 beds, but they get 8, so they'd all be in there. It wouldn't make noise and bother the people and all. So yeah. So here's another magical moment that happened. We're walking up on the spiritual variant one day in the morning. It's about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 to say. And there's just a little chapel came across the upper left-hand corner. And so these 2 ladies that you see in the center picture here came out and greeted us and asked us to come in for a brief service. So okay. So we came in, took our packs off, and they proceeded to sing a song. And she played guitar, and they were very good. They're from Ireland, doing this as a volunteer gig. Afterwards, they gave us a hug, very soulful, meaningful hug, gave us a little crack pamphlet. And apparently they come and do this for 2 or 3 weeks every year. So the significance of the guy in the lower right-hand corner is he was one of the guys back in the 70s that helped build this chapel back in the 70s. And he's 98 years old. And so each morning he would stand out there as if he was feeling good, get up and come out at 9:30 in the morning and meet pilgrims as they came by and greet them on their journey. And so that was a very, very special moment. Never didn't even know it existed. We just stumbled into it. So here's some people who've had health issues. And one day on the left here, we met this gal, Margot from the Netherlands. She's an accountant. I asked her early in the morning, I said, so why are you walking Camino? And she said, well, 3 years ago, I had gastric bypass surgery. And I kind of prayed with God. And I said, if this works, then I'll walk Camino. She lost 50 kilos, 110 pounds. And when I showed this picture to my doc in my annual physical, he said, she lost a person. I said, yeah, she's half of what she was, right? And she was pretty open about that. I didn't have to drag it out of her. She just told me her story. It was kind of like a testimonial on her part. The gal over here who was real a sweetheart, she Tanya Valdez in Ohio, Spain, Oya, Spain, little town. She was originally from Minnesota and lived in Colorado. She'd walked Camino 4, almost 5 times. She'd had stage 3 cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma back in 2000, I think 3. And she was a survivor of cancer. She's walked, she's owned her albergue and for 6 years there in this little town. And she had found her calling. She'd really found her purpose in life for being there. And then there's Francisco. So like I said, we met January of 2023. We walked, and then as we were walking the trails in Spain last year, he was walking the Primitiva in northern Spain, which is probably one of the toughest trails. Not the longest, but the toughest, up and down hills, just changing elevations up and down 25, 30 times a day. And I was walking the Frances. And so we were WhatsApping back and forth. I was having back problems. He was telling me he was having toe problems. The nails on his big toes were lifting. Yeah, eventually, they both came off. Unbeknownst to me, he was also having heart racing. So he was having to watch his Apple watch, and watch his beats per minute and slow down, so his heart would slow down. So he gets back here in Sacramento. He lives in Lincoln in August, and he's out playing. What do they call that thing? Pickleball, right? And he can't breathe. And his son-in-law takes him to the emergency room up there in Roseville, and at the hospital, and they actually have to stop his heart. And they discovered that he has a blockage, like 80% in one artery, 90% in the other. And so they put a stent in one day and stent the next day. So they thought everything was all good, right? Well, he continued to have problems with tachycardia. And at one point, his heart raced. It's like a month later in September. His heart was racing like 210, 220 beats per minute for an hour and a half. And the chief cardiologist at Sutter says, I don't know how you're alive. This doesn't happen. And the only reason he was alive is because he'd been a lifelong athlete, worked out. He had a resting heartbeat of like 57. He had the heart of a 25-year-old. And so they figured they tested all this stuff. So in December, he went in and they did this, they call it an SVT ablation. So basically what they do is they run a camera up and run a laser up. They give you adrenaline, see where your heart's racing. They zap you in those spots. So you solve the problem. And it works in like 96, 98% of the time. And so meantime, Francisco's has the whole time he's asking his doc, he says, so am I going to be able to walk the Camino next year? And the guy's going like, time out. Let's get this heart fixed first. And so he has that process, that thing in the first week in December last year. I'm calling him in the recovery room and we're talking and he's groggy still. He does about 30 days worth of physiotherapy and they say he's good to go. So this year we're walking and we're in Porto before we leave. And at one point he says, we're at this Kinder Kitchen. It was a vegan vegetarian restaurant, Linda. Okay. We were eating good that night before we started our tapas. He says, I really ought to probably give you my travel insurance policy. So we exchanged electronically our travel insurance to see if we had problems, how they get us back, either alive or in a box, right? And so we had those in our phones. And walking, had no problems to speak of. He's faster than I am on a straightaway. He's faster than I am downhill because I don't want to face plant. Going uphill, I've got a goat gear that I can keep up with him. And only a few times, 2 or 3 times, I said, okay, how's your heart? He checked, said, let's wait a minute. He did, and we continued on. So anyway, people do have health issues, right? And come back and walk once again. So, and this was his 7th Camino. Now, one of the things that happened before I left, in the 2 weeks before I left Sacramento, I went to 3 memorial services. And I was thinking about this the whole time I walked. And the first one was Michael Moran, who was a minister, a Unity minister. He'd been a broadcaster. He was a really significant portion of my life from the standpoint of I met him first in Unity Village in outside of Kansas City, Missouri, back in 1994. I attended the first service at his church in November of 98. He offered me a position to work in the church, and I worked at the church for 3.5 years. And he really acted as a mentor for me in that 3.5 years to kind of help me adjust to working in the nonprofit and social sector. And so I had a friend of mine in Renaissance Society last December who had said, hey, have you talked to Michael lately? And I said, well, no. She sent me the stuff, on the phone. And I procrastinated and didn't call him, and it was on my list to call. And then about February the 6th of this year, I was visiting a guy at Kaiser, and we were talking, and the guy was on dialysis, in and out of it. I asked the guy, the technician, for his phone, and unbeknownst to me, he dials up, and we end up talking to Michael Moran. And we had a really good conversation. And the next month, Michael died. And so I went to his memorial service before I left. About 2 weeks before I left. Actually 2 weeks before I left. And then the next person was a fellow named Byron Watkins. And the following Tuesday, I went to his remembrance service, and he had worked for me at Habitat for Humanity here in Sacramento, and was our restore manager. He went for the first global village trip to build houses in Nicaragua, and you see this picture down here, a house we built. He actually had talked him into being a Habitat homeowner, applying. Gave me no special treatment, but I said, you need to do this for your family. He did it. He got a house. And he was really one of these guys who drunk the Kool-Aid as far as believing in our mission. And he was the first guy to get a tear in his eye when we had a home dedication. So he's a humble, hard worker, very sensitive, really wore his emotions on his sleeve. He's a family man who took care of both his mother and his son. So the last one I went to was a memorial service the night before I left, once again, on Friday night, before I left on Saturday, for Joan Burke. And Joan worked at Loaves and Fishes for 35 years. She was executive director of Mary House, a day center for women and homeless women with children. She was director of advocacy for about 17, 18 years. And she was on the board of directors of a number of different organizations. And so I met Joan initially. We were serving on the board for Women's Empowerment, the founding board members for 9 years. I really valued her opinion, very impressed by her. She asked me to join the Sacramento Housing Alliance when she was board president. I served on their board for 15 years and was board president for 4. And she was really a role model for me, what a community advocate and activist is all about. And she was intelligent, articulate, passionate, humble, and elected officials, when she talked, they listened to her. The city council, the board of supervisors would seek out her counsel because she was so passionate but grounded in what she had to say. So I continued to ponder these 3 people as I walked. And I think the other thing you see is one of the things you see on the Camino is people are oftentimes grieving for the loss of loved ones. And last year I met this guy, Danny, who was 79 years old. He lost his wife to a brain tumor. He was a caregiver for about 18 months. He'd walked the Camino once before for about 100 kilometers. He had health issues, walked with his son. Now he's coming back. He walked almost 800 kilometers last year. So to the right here and the next over is this woman with the 2 kids. She was Susan. She was from Australia, very accomplished, PhD at something. She managed a foundation for 14 years. Her husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He came home. They both quit their jobs, spent the last 18 months together. So this was on the Frances last year. Her son and her daughter had come to walk with her the last 100 kilometers of the Camino, right? On the right here is Gert, and I met him last year, and he was his daughter died at age 49 it was, and he was really it helped him to relieve the burden of that loss. And then Francisco. The reason Francisco walked the first time is his wife passed in 2016, and he had once again been a caregiver about 18 months. He was very, very angry. He had just retired. They had plans of what they're going to do. And so he walked Camino in 2017, the Frances, the French way, over 800 kilometers. He did it in 28 days, which is really, really fast. And so he's continued to walk every year except 1 year for COVID. But I think it shows people walk oftentimes to walk through their grief. So this shows us arriving and leaving Santiago. It's kind of like this picture up in the upper left-hand corner. It's like the portal on the going into Santiago. And here we're down to 5 kilometers and shows us arriving at the cathedral, which has been there for over 1,000 years. St. James is buried under that. So one of the things we did after we went there, we went down to get our Compostela, our certificate for having walked. And Francisco meets this couple. And it was Lourdes and Paulo Cruz, and they were both 1985 grads of Sac State in electrical engineering. They live at Pismo Beach now, so they're both just about retiring. And then we departed once again the next day, headed to Finisterre, which is our last leg. But before we went, we stopped and had a pilgrim's mass, and this is at noon each day in the cathedral. This woman here is Jackie, I mentioned before, from France, and she's a retired pediatrician. She's getting ready to volunteer and go to Thailand to work with kids there. And so what she'd been pondering the whole time she was on this trip was her son. She had 2 sons, and one of her sons said, you spent more time with those kids that you were a pediatrician or than you did with us. And you could have thrown a harpoon through her heart, right? Feeling that. And so she was always journaling, trying to process, how she was going to deal with that. And our picture of Francisco and I, and the building did not collapse with the 2 of us in there, so that's good. And then this shows the cathedral itself. Certain holidays of the year, they swing this big incense burner during the service, and that tradition goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. So we walked on to Finisterre. This kind of shows the trail that's on 90 kilometers to the end of the earth. And one of the people we ran across again was this woman, Carolina, who was an earlier picture. I don't think I said anything about her, but her four sons had paid for her. She was originally from Germany, living in Spain. Her four sons had paid for her to be able to come and walk Camino. So we ran into her in Finisterre. This is the lighthouse at the end of the most farthest west portion of the on the Iberian Peninsula. And used to be all kinds of ships would crash there, and so they put this lighthouse there. And then it's actually the last marker, and it actually says 0 kilometers on it. So, yep. So one of the things I couldn't see last year because it was closed, and then was this museum. And a friend of mine, Donna Abadoni, some of you may know her from in the lower left-hand corner, was with Capital Public Radio for years. She actually wrote this book about 10 years ago called Transformation. On the cover, she has this picture of this staircase, this winding staircase. Well, that's inside this museum. So I said, Francisco, I got to stop here and we'll go and take it. So at the very bottom of this, they had footprints on the floor so you could get a perfect shot of this winding staircase. And I sent it to Donna and said, it does exist. We have confirmed that it's not an illusion, but it actually does exist. And then before we left, we picked up some gifts, some mementos for our families. This was actually, Francisco didn't know this one. I showed him this convent here where they bake these tarts, this famous tarta de Santiago. It's a almond cake, and they also do these almond cookies here. So and then once again, there are the markers I talked about. This is in Galicia, in Spain, and this is Castilla and Leon is where they use this one. And then these are my certificates I have over here if you want to take a look at them. One is for distance, and these are the ones you go in to show your credential, and they award them to you. And this one is to show that you actually certifies the completion of the Camino. So one of the things I had a problem with last year was the physical side of walking Camino. And my wife found out that you could transport your package. She says, you're going to do that. And I said, well, we'll see. And I discovered as I came on the Camino that I had back problems with my chiropractor. I've been having back problems for 35 years. Went to see him the Thursday before I left. And he said, if you can walk a mile today, he adjusted me. So you need to come back on Monday, the day before you leave. And he got me all fixed up. But then I made the mistake of carrying too heavy a pack. And this is how I got the name Sacramento Sideways. I'm standing up right there, but I actually stayed sideways. So I ended up transporting my pack from there on in this blue IKEA bag, wearing this magnetic pad. And I would lay down on the ground about every hour and a half, 2 hours, and stretch my back. You can maybe see my shoes before and after. I got this anti-inflammatory cream. I took ibuprofen every night to relax everything, got a massage. And then I learned the first most important lesson of the Camino is to listen to your wife and to walk your own Camino. So that's from last year, right? And, so I told this to a group of students from Gerontology 121. And the only two people who laughed were the teacher and over here, right? Everybody else, all the kids didn't get it. I said, well, it's going to take a few decades for you to get that one, right? So you got to know your audience, right? Then I learned, I think, out of that walk about your people and relationships. Everybody's unique, the diversity in the world, humanity, gratitude and appreciation. But the other thing I learned was the question of what's the smaller airplane? And I'll come back to that, tell you what that's all about. So one of the things as I was walking with a psychologist from Brazil for about 7 days, the longest I walked with anybody last year. And I came to this awareness I'd really never thanked my wife for the impact she's had on the second half of my life. Really, she couldn't force me to do anything, but she really kind of acted as a foil, kind of poked me and challenged my thinking process. And so when I got back, I wrote this 30-page single space set of stories to her about our time together. And we had been married like 33 years at that point. And then I dropped in pictures, so it was like 40 pages long. And so this highlights kind of things in my life, where I grew up in Mount Vernon, Illinois, being an Eagle Scout, going to West Point, Glee Club, traveling, my journey, Habitat for Humanity, men's group I was in, helped start, coaching, going to Nicaragua, my family, my daughter, Abby, my granddaughter, Quinn, the pilgrims, all the animals in our life, my wife up there with her girlfriends. And so all these things. And so my wife read this story and handed it to my niece. And one portion of it, there was like a paragraph that I wrote. And our niece, Haley's been living with us for the last 2 years. She's had mental health issues for about 15 years. And it basically talked to her, hopefully being able to help her have a sustainable, independent life. She took that document. They're both very highly intuitive. She flipped right to the page with the paragraph about her and read it. Let's go. Okay, right. So one of the guys I met along the way was this guy, Lynn, and we were sitting having dinner one night, and he had run into a young woman who was a female Army aviator or military aviator. And he used the metaphor. He says, at my age, there's more runway behind me than in front of me. And she immediately says, get a smaller airplane. I mean, and we both broke out laughing because I just thought, what does that mean to get a smaller airplane? And so I've been thinking about that all this year, right? What that smaller airplane is all about. So here I am sitting at the airport at the end. Francisco took this picture of me. I didn't know it, and he sent it to me later. So what I learned on the Camino this year, people always ask you that. I realized the plane is getting smaller and the runway is getting shorter. And the value of friends, and that you're losing friends faster than you're gaining them. So stay in touch and help your friends. And take advantage of the unique opportunities to make new friends. And so, Francisco is a real gift to meet him. And, that opportunity arose. And I've had some others to say social interaction is critical to aging well. And every day is a do-over. So have fun. So 2 weeks from Saturday, I'm flying to the Northeast. Going to spend a week with my daughter and my granddaughter, who I haven't seen in years because they've been overseas. And my granddaughter is the activities director, and I have an exhausting week already set up of all the things we're going to do, right? And then the next week, I'm going to my 50th reunion at my graduation reunion at West Point with my classmates that I've known for 54 years. So anyway, take advantage of those opportunities. And for the next year, continue to do all those things about taking care of yourself, trying to make a difference, trying to stay on focus with your purpose, combination of passion, strengths, service equals purpose. And then what we're going to do next year, before we even started walking this year, Francisco saying, do you want to walk in Italy next year? I said, let's just get one done before the next. But next year, we're going to do the Via Francigena, which is long. It actually starts from England to Rome. We're going to go from Tuscany and Lucca down to Rome, which is about 440 kilometers. So these are the trail markers. This is what the credential looks like, and this is what their form of the Compostela looks like. It's a hike too, same way. Yeah, we're going to probably transport packs, try to keep you to 20 kilometers a day. So yeah.
But you've never spoken in Portuguese.
Francisco did. He studied Portuguese before he went. He could do something. I couldn't do anything, any place, anywhere. On a good day, I could speak English, right? So that's fine. So people ask me, is the Camino calling you? There's a physical, mental, and spiritual component to this. If you're intrigued about this, there's a local organization here that walks the last Sunday of each month, and they have monthly Camino presentations, nonprofit, no cost to you. They meet either over at the Art Endemic Library or at REI, depending. They send out messages. They have a great website that's been redone that tells you answers 90% of your questions. So something to think about. And here's more about them, and it shows you a group we just walked on actually last Sunday. And here's one of our Camino 101 series. We're back at REI, and this evening we were doing a section on Camino gear and packing tips, and they also have them on preparation and on a day on the Camino and resources. And they have a couple of potlucks a year, a shell ceremony in March, and then in November they'll have an end of year ceremony. And then this is my niece down here, and I surprised for me. I said, "Would you like to go?" She said, "Yes, I'd like to go." She hasn't been out in public in a group like this in 15 years. And so she came, attended, My friends were really nice and kind of knew her story. They had a drawing, and there was two things she wanted. There was a watch they had there, and he had a necklace, and she wanted both. And a friend of mine brought that watch. He hadn't planned to come, but the last minute she said, "Well, I'm going to come," and she hadn't come. The watch wouldn't have been there. So, um, so I'm going to play just a real clip, about 4 minutes here, and this is out of Rick Steve interviewed Martin Sheen and his son Emilio Estevez about the way in the movie they made back in 2010. And there was a portion, it's about a half hour long, but there's a little portion at the end where Rick Steve sets this question up. He says, "So what if you can't do a pilgrimage? You can't go to Europe. You don't have the time, the energy, the money, the resources, you can't get away, whatever. What do you suggest to us?" So I'm going to see if I can. I think I might be able to do this. Yeah, let's see here. So this is Rick Steves interviewing Martin Sheen and Amelia Estevez.
Martin, any last thoughts on this discussion and the potential of this re-release of this movie?
Well, since the film was released, the responses were overwhelming. And we got information from the Spanish Tourist Board that the number of people on the Camino who were inspired by the film specifically had increased like a third or something just because of the film. And we were hearing from an awful lot of those people. And people have done the Camino with family.
Yeah.
They've done it when they've lost a family member. They've done it in remembrance. They've done it for penance and absolution for their own lives. They've been revitalized. They've become their true selves in a lot of respects. And that has been the most rewarding part of it. For my own part, I've never done a project that I have been more inspired by or more comfortable with. You only get one of these if you're lucky in a lifetime, and maybe we'll get another one before we're finished working. But it has been the most satisfying project of my life.
Boy,
and
that is saying something.
Yes, very much. And it keeps on giving. We keep running into people here and there. People tell us the effect that it's had on them and what they've done as a result. And that is the most gratifying thing.
You guys have raised awareness of what is the meaning and the potential of a pilgrimage. And a lot of people put it in one sort of religious pigeonhole. Oh, there's a bunch of Christians walking to Rome or something like that. But people of all different faiths have pilgrimages. People that don't have faith have pilgrimages. Muhammad, part of their thing is you got to go to Mecca once in your life for the Hajj. But he also said if you can't afford or you're unable to go to Mecca, travel someplace. The bottom line is travel someplace. So, Martin Sheen, if you could take one idea that you've got somebody inspired by the potential, but they can't travel, how can you have the Camino experience in your everyday life? Because I would imagine you don't have to have a passport to have the value of this trip. How could you do it here?
If you have compassion for yourself, it will extend itself into someone else. Sometimes our pilgrimage is just to cross the street to witness a need or to express a measure of compassion for someone else. That's what opens us up.
Yeah.
That's what cracks our hearts open. And a pilgrimage can be a few yards, a few meters. It's the thought process where the heart leads us. And it's that instinct that so often we ignore because of fear or can't be bothered, not the time. But there are those moments where we cross the street and we're never able to go home the same.
Martin Sheen, Emilio Estevez, Bon Camino.
And keep on traveling.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
So, I'll open it up for questions. I have my prop stuff over here. We want to see some of the memorabilia.
So does your wife want to go for an everyday review?
No. I don't even want to do that. When I see how hard the Albergate people work, it's a real commitment. You describe a day for them, it's not many rest days, and people run them. We actually had a presentation by a couple from Chico that own one. in the last 100 kilometers of Spain, and they will say they work for about 10 days and they have to take a break, and do it again because it's just real demanding. And, not for the light of heart there. So, no, but I can't sell that one. I can't sell that one.
Tom did 3 miles of the Camino this year.
Oh, very good. Very good. Very good. There you go. There you go. Well, I encourage anybody, if you want to know more about the Camino, this group, the organization Sacramento Pilgrims, is great as far as even if you don't walk Camino, but I started going to their meetings every month last year, and what I realized, Linda, to your point of what you're doing here, is I looked around the room, and it's an older rather than a younger group. I would say generally, but there are people all ages. But there are 3 things I saw in there. One, the people were all socially connected, right? They were interacting. 2, they were doing something physical at their own pace, right? And number 3, there was some form of purpose, not necessarily religious, not necessarily spiritual, but some reason why they were doing this. And people don't always know why they walked Camino. Sometimes they don't even know when they finish, right? They're still processing it later. But if you have those 3 components, right? Social interaction, physical activity, and a sense of purpose in life, they're going to age better probably than your contemporaries that aren't doing those things, right? So once again,
Some vegetables along the way.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So needless to say, we don't keep the diet we did there. My doctor did look at my weight last year because I eat those pilgrim meals, and I got down to like 200 pounds last year. This year I was a little bit higher. Now, to say, his medical assistant didn't take off the weight from my clothes, right? But he was looking at the difference, and he pointed out to me. I said, yeah, I know. I'm back to walking again. So I didn't lose as much weight this year. So yeah. So good. Yeah, absolutely. How we doing?
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Francisco on the. Bunch of us on Thursday.
I will, I'll see if I don't know if he's he's going someplace. He travels a lot. He gets out. He's pretty active. Seems to me he's going hiking someplace, but I'll invite him. Yeah. I'll invite him. Yeah. And I have to tell him I'll still be in New York. I don't get back to the 2nd of September. So good. So I'm going to New Hampshire, New London, New Hampshire for a week, where my daughter lives, and then to West Point. I'm going to stay in a Tarrytown, but I'm going to West Point for a week. Yeah. So, yeah. It's so West Point is 50 miles north on the Hudson River, north of New York City. So it's kind of in this jut out to where historically it was a place they tried to defend against the British to keep them coming up the river. Actually, in New York, yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for listening to all that today. And if any time you have a group or something, I gave this presentation half a dozen times last year to Gerontology 101, 121, Friendship for Sacramento, a couple times at Renaissance Society. So if there's a group you have, I'm always
Health issues, the